The story begins with a goddess summoning an entire high school class to a world called fantasy. She informs them that the Demon King has been resurrected and that the world needs heroes to save it. The students cannot believe this, which is understandable. It's not every day you get transported to another world. The goddess then tells them they will be transferred to the Temple of Fantasy, where they will be greeted by the goddess's trusted saint. One of the students asks the goddess if this world has a system of attributes, skill points, and levels. To this, the goddess gives an affirmative answer. Another student asks if only the strongest among them will become the hero. The goddess replies that they will all become heroes, but will receive different levels of power, which will depend on the recognition and blessing of the gods of fantasy. A girl asks if they will be able to return home. The goddess replied that they would only be able to return once they defeated the Demon King. The main protagonist, a shy and awkward boy, also decided to ask the goddess if he could return to Earth. Once again, he received the same answer. He could only go back after defeating the Demon King. However, the protagonist didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to return to Earth. Surprisingly, the goddess agreed to send him back, giving him a sly smile and saying he wasn't fit for a place meant for great heroes. The goddess opened a portal, and the protagonist stepped through. He found himself in a dark forest and muttered, "Seems like I've been sent quite far from school." At that moment, a group of gnolls emerged from the forest shouting, "Meat!" As you might have guessed, he wasn't sent back to Earth. The scene shifts to the remaining heroes in the sacred city, where they are greeted by the saint and several others. It turns out those people are their instructors. Alos, a master swordsman and prince of the kingdom of swordmasters Ithena, a princess from the Archmage kingdom and a magical mentor for the future heroes. The heroes then begin to examine their status windows, where things turn out to be not as simple as they expected. One of the buffs is called Hero's Blessing, a skill that automatically translates the languages of friendly races. One of the heroes asks, "The goddess said we need to earn the god's blessings. How do we do that?" At that moment, dialogue windows appear before the heroes stating, "Some gods are watching you." The saint explains that the gods are observing them and will grant their blessings based on their preferences. A student asks, "What happens if someone doesn't receive any blessings?" To this, the saint coldly replies, "Why should she care about such trash?" The scene shifts back to the protagonist, who is running through the forest, chased by a mob of angry gnolls. Being weak and out of shape, he quickly becomes exhausted. Barely catching his breath for a moment, the gnolls catch up to him. Looking at the gnolls, the protagonist reaches a brilliant conclusion. Creatures like this don't exist on Earth. The goddess tricked me. She never intended to send me back. Well, judging by the goddess's sly smirk, Kan Hansu, that's the protagonist's name, by the way, probably should have figured this out. "Think, Kan Hansu," he tells himself. "If this is a fantasy world, there must be magic here." Right then, a status window appeared before him. All the lines were blank except for one, Curse, which read, Hero Rank E. It turns out he gained the ability to understand the languages of hostile races and a debuff that reduced the experience he earned from hunting and achievements. The cursed goddess not only sent him to die in a forest full of gnolls, but also saddled him with a debuff that makes it harder to level up in a world where everything depends on leveling. But there's a silver lining. He can now understand the gnolls trying to eat him. He decided to try diplomacy and shouted, "Hey, meat lovers, how about we talk this out?" The gnolls, shocked, replied with confused expressions. "A talking piece of meat? Let's eat first, then we can talk." Kan Hansu sighed, realizing he was out of strength and couldn't outrun the gnolls anymore. He resigned himself to his fate. Suddenly, he heard voices in an unfamiliar language, and arrows began raining down from above. One of them hit him right in the thigh. It turned out the newcomers were elves, though their reason for shooting at him was unclear. A chaotic battle erupted between the gnolls and the elves, while the protagonist tried to crawl away unnoticed. He managed to get away but had a serious injury. His femoral artery was hit. Kan Hansu realized he had no chance of survival and considered praying, but he thought, better to die than pray to the gods of this world. As he lay there, unbeknownst to him, some mysterious god was observing him closely. The gnolls had already returned, but the unknown god cautiously continued to watch him. The protagonist realizes it would be stupid to just lie there and die, so he shouts, "Help me!" The god, however, doesn't rush to save him and instead asks why he's alone. Yes, the guy's bleeding out, and the god decides it's a good time to learn about his past. Kan Hansu can't exactly tell the truth, that the damned goddess sent him to die in this forest, because this minor god might be her friend. So he pleads with the god to save him first, as he's dying in agony. Then the protagonist mutters aloud, "Maybe there are other gods here who could save me." This surprises the god, who replies that there can't possibly be other gods here. Kan Hansu, frustrated, asks, "Are you some kind of Asa or what?" The god, confused, doesn't understand what Asa means. And by the way, it's my first time hearing it too. Asa is short for outsider, but Kan Hansu doesn't want to explain it directly, fearing it might earn him another curse. He quickly improvises. Asa is like a lone wolf wandering the wastelands. The god seems to like this explanation. Kan Hansu asks again for the god to save him, but the god counters with a question. Are you an Asa too? The protagonist recalls that in the real world, he wasn't an outsider. He had friends. But desperate times call for desperate measures, so he answers, yes, I'm an outsider too. But the god drifted into flashbacks, recalling a bad past. After a moment, he declared that the protagonist would never die. The god then cast a spell on Kan Hansu, and a green glow dissolved the deadly arrow and erased the pain. Now a new blessing appeared in Kan Hansu's status window. Outsider's Blessing. This skill resets all conditions except death. If the lone wolf leaves the wasteland, terrible things will happen. The meaning wasn't entirely clear, but Kan Hansu assumed that if he stopped being an outsider, he'd face some punishment since this god only helps outsiders. Not that it mattered much. Thanks to the hero's curse, he couldn't understand the speech of friendly races anyway. Deciding to get out of the mess, Kan Hansu tried to sneak away, but he stepped on a branch, and the loud snap was enough for the gnolls to hear him. The entire mob of gnolls starts chasing the protagonist, shouting, "The meat is running away! Stop, let's talk!" The protagonist realizes that the divine buff resets all conditions, including fatigue. While the gnolls grow tired, they refuse to give up. One of them hurls a rock at him, hitting its mark. But the protagonist immediately heals and keeps running. He suddenly comes to the edge of a cliff. There's nowhere else to go. An idea pops into his head. If he jumps off the cliff, he'll just heal upon landing. But the god reminds him that if he dies in a single hit, he won't recover, and the cliff's height looks pretty lethal. With gnolls on one side and the abyss on the other, it's decision time. He yells, "Hey, stupid gnolls! Whoever catches me first gets all the tastiest parts." Then he throws himself off the cliff. All the gnolls leap after him, shouting, "Dinner is falling!" They fell from a great height, and the protagonist lost consciousness. He woke up moments later and realized he was alive, unlike the gnolls. However, it turned out that one gnoll had survived and was weakly trying to aim his dagger at the protagonist. Too injured to pose much of a threat, the gnoll was finished off by the protagonist, who used a rock, hoping to gain some experience. The scene shifts to the other heroes, where the Saint is explaining that they can gain experience either by killing monsters or by receiving blessings from the gods. One of the girls asks the Saint if the gods are watching them all the time. The Saint confirms this, adding that the gods even watch when they're using the bathroom or bathing. something that didn't sit well with the heroes, especially the girls. Another girl speculates aloud that the more attention they attract from the gods, the more blessings they might receive. For her insightful guess, one of the gods immediately granted her a blessing. It's called Charm Rank F. One of the girls immediately decided to try it out and seduced all the nerds in her class. The saint asked her to stop spreading the charm, but the girl decided to show off. As a result, she immediately received a debuff of condemnation from another god, followed by a smack on the backside from the saint. That's when the heroes realize they shouldn't abuse divine mercy too much. The scene shifts back to the protagonist. He finished off all the gnolls, but still didn't level up, even though they were much higher level than him. This is all due to the hero's curse, which reduces the experience gained. Not all the gnolls jumped off the cliff with him. The rest of their group went around and is still searching for the protagonist. Since gnolls are still part dog, they've caught the scent of a human, though they haven't been able to find him yet. The protagonist suddenly felt that after the last fight, he had become stronger and could make some contraption using rope and a rock. "I'll show these fantasy monsters the power of science," he thought, and began swinging the rope with the rock above his head. This thing was very heavy, but thanks to the buff, he constantly reset his fatigue and could keep swinging it non-stop. He started throwing it at the gnolls, slowly understanding how his buff worked. He just needed to avoid instant death, and the buff would heal him if necessary. One by one, he knocked the gnolls out, and they stopped charging at him, realizing that he wouldn't tire out so easily. Fatigue was no longer an issue for him, and the protagonist successfully dealt with all the monsters. One gnoll was still alive, and the protagonist decided to interrogate him. Where do the humans live? To his surprise, the gnoll didn't lie and pointed in the direction where humans were supposed to live. It was strange that, after all the gnoll killings, the protagonist was still at level 1. Apparently, the experience debuff wasn't so weak after all. We shift back to the other heroes, who are about to begin their magic and swordsmanship training. They need to choose one or the other. One of the top students asked if it was possible to study both. They were told yes, and that they could quit one at any time. There was also a lofty boy who said he would refuse both skills and would leave the temple in his free time to do whatever he wanted. We then see this lofty boy who thinks training is for idiots. He doesn't need it, just like the protagonist, because he has a cheat skill. He immediately decided to explore the ruins. All because this guy has the uniqueness buff, which states that he possesses the most unique fate in the world. Because of this, his ego soared to heights beyond the heavens. He didn't waste time and headed for the city. Of course, he immediately went to the mercenary guild because all adventures always start there. He did this because it's a standard move for any fantasy hero, and he's played thousands of such games. A pink-haired girl approached him and told him to stop with the nonsense and go back to his homeland. His ego thought that this must be the effect of his blessing, so he offered to become her companion. He told her that he couldn't reveal everything right now, but he's the chosen one. No proof would be provided. We return to the protagonist, who has defeated all the gnolls, sustained numerous deadly wounds, yet is still alive and well. It turns out he hadn't killed them all, as a gnoll attacks him from behind. He reacts just in time and stabs it in the heart with a dagger. There were a few more gnolls. After killing them, his level still remained at 1. Suddenly, the protagonist hears a language he doesn't understand. Could it be the Elves again? It turns out that the voice belongs to a group of 3 people, 2 swordsmen and 1 archer. The girl archer spotted him and aimed her crossbow at him. The protagonist raised his hands in surrender and shouted that he gave up, though it's important to remember that due to the debuff, they couldn't understand each other. But it seemed like they understood he meant no harm, and they smiled. After that, they set off toward the city. The girl tried to talk to him, but all he understood was his name, Kan Hansu. They were saying something to him, but he didn't understand a word. The god, through a dialogue window, hinted to the protagonist that it didn't seem like he was acting like an outsider. Despite the language barrier, the protagonist got introduced to them. The hairy guy with the sword, Gary. The guy with 2 swords, Call. The girl with pink hair, Misa, their archer. There was smoke rising from the mountain, which meant they were almost at the city. All 3 of them suddenly turned to look at the forest, where a group of gnolls was charging toward them. How many of them are in this forest? The battle began. Jerry knocked the gnolls back with his huge sword, while Call slashed at them from the flank. Misa was shooting them from behind, but one of the gnolls managed to sneak up and try to attack the archer. The protagonist reacted just in time and shielded her with his own body. The outsider god didn't really react to this, because the protagonist wasn't supposed to help others. After all, he's a lone wolf. The protagonist, however, had a different opinion and attacked the gnoll. Great job. All the gnolls were killed and no one got hurt. But then the 2 swordsmen looked at the protagonist strangely, and Misa aimed her crossbow at him. "You're joking, right?" The pink-haired bitch pulled the trigger and shot the protagonist straight in the chest. Because of the gnolls, things went off track, but it showed just how dangerous he was, said the archer. Nothing can be done. This guy would hardly let himself be sold into slavery. One of the swordsmen moved in to finish him off, but saw the status window on the protagonist's screen, meaning he was still alive. The protagonist quickly drove a dagger into the bastard's neck. After the first, he rushed at the second swordsman, and at that very moment, 2 arrows struck him in the chest. But he didn't care. His regeneration would restore everything. The pink-haired bitch, confused, started apologizing to Kan Hansu and begging for mercy. But it was too late. Thus, the protagonist acquired armor and a crossbow. The only thing he didn't understand was why they attacked him when they had been talking just fine. We now return to the temple, where the other heroes continue their magic training. The magic teacher chose a girl, Eubora, as his student, making her his first pupil. Her status window now showed the magic protection rank C. The mentor explained to her that one could only become a magician if their parents were magicians, or if their teacher granted them the protection. We return to the protagonist, who has just arrived in the city. The guard said something to him, but he didn't understand a word. However, they quickly found common ground: bribes. Kan Hansu went to an inn to rent a room and take a bath. How great it is to have money. With it, you can get what you want, even without a common language. The outsider god told the protagonist that he felt uneasy and that there was some conversation behind the door. The most important thing was that the protagonist could understand it, which meant there were enemies. It turned out to be the village elder, who said he had been informed that there was a person who didn't speak their language and had come to check. The elder feared that an elf had secretly entered the village. They had a rivalry with elves because the elves had pushed the gnolls out of their lands, and the gnolls had come to humans. As a result, many people had died. Before leaving, the elder asked, "May I ask one question? Why hasn't the drug added to your dinner worked yet?" The protagonist pulled out a dagger and attacked the elder, but he was too late. The drug had already started to take effect. The outsider god reproached the protagonist for not listening to his earlier warning about the danger. The protagonist found himself in a basement, where the elder revealed that their real enemy was the elves. The elves had placed a curse on the elder that shortened his life and youth. It was the hatred of all the elves he had killed. The elder asked the protagonist where he had gotten the dagger, the very one he had taken from the main gnoll. But the protagonist decided to tell the elder that he had taken the dagger from an elf who had shot at him with a bow. He explained that, like the elder, he was also an enemy of the elves, and thus they were on the same side. The elder said that he no longer wanted to kill the protagonist, but he had no choice because he had seen his status and his secret little basement. He confessed that he was a dark mage, and to prove it, he unleashed an elven woman from chains. "You all must become sacrifices to extend my life. And as a thank you for killing the royal blood elf, I will sacrifice you painlessly," said the headman. "Hey, village headman," Kang Hansu calls out to him. "You must have followed a path that no one recognizes. The The protagonist tells him that they are actually both outsiders and should help each other. The headman agreed with him, but this proves once again that he should be alone. Diplomacy failed. The first victim of the headman will be an elf boy. The sacrifice began. The protagonist was surprised that the headman did not look a bit younger after draining the life of this elf. That's because he's not human. He's a gnoll, and at that point, I yelled. The headman says, "Announce that you are handing over your life to me, because dark magic requires the consent of its victims." It's not good. The protagonist needs to figure out how to get out. He asks for a last wish. He would like to see Misa one last time, the bitch with a crossbow that shot the protagonist, because she's the protagonist's sweetheart. But the headman says, "Don't lie, because she was dating that swordsman." The Kang Hansu replied, "Smell me and you'll understand that I smell like Misa. And one more wish. If I survive, then you will let me go." To which the headman replied that after the ritual, people can't survive after the ritual. And with that, they made a deal, and the protagonist experienced wild pain all over his body. "I'll tell Misa that you left, but there will be difficulties because Misa left first." After that, the Kang Hansu breaks free and punches the headman in the face. The headman is shocked why the protagonist is still not dead. The protagonist told him it's the blessing of the outsider god. He restored all the stolen years of life. "Headman, don't forget your promise. You said you'd let me go if I lived." The protagonist takes his dagger and shatters the shackles of the Elven women that were in the basement. He grabs one of them on his shoulder and walks towards the exit. The headman yells, "Stop," but he can't attack him since there is a contract between them. But if you return the years stolen from the victim, the contract can be broken. So he starts sucking lives back into the protagonist. Then his mouth starts to bleed. "Who the hell are you? Do you have unlimited life expectancy?" The protagonist shouts out that he's an apostle of the outsider god, much to the god's embarrassment. But the headman doesn't plan to die yet and fights the protagonist and gives him very deep wounds. But just a couple of seconds later, these wounds healed. That was the last thing the headman saw. He freed all the elves and called the locals here, and I tried to get out of here as soon as possible. But I caught some very strange looks from the locals. Damn what those damned elves told them. The whole town chased after him. What a shitty fantasy world. The actions are transferred to the temple, where crowds of mentors are pouring in to teach the heroes. Because the mentor of the hero is quite a respected title. One of the students asks if mathematical knowledge is needed to use magic. One mentor replied that they were needed to save money and properly calculate mana in battle. Another is that the angle and calculation of the wind direction are important for creating a flame. Then we are shown the very elves that the main character saved from the village headman. And then they tell us why the villagers attacked the main character. The elves asked him to catch him because of his dagger, which turned out to belong to the princess of the elves. A silver-haired elf with turquoise hair intervened in this conversation. She is an elf from the royal family. She said that he could have left them there to die, but he saved them anyway, and that she was going in search of this man. The outsider god was spying on this conversation. Turn to the protagonist. He was alive after falling off a cliff. Regeneration, you know. But Khan Hansu didn't spend long idling. The gnolls found him in the forest. But now he's not that cowardly weakling anymore. He immediately jumped into the fray and scattered them in just a couple of seconds. He felt that he had become stronger, but his status window was still level 1. He decided to interrogate one of the surviving gnolls, as he understands their language. He said that he would give him elf meat if he told him the secret of reddening eyes. This is the technique that the headman used. The gnoll said that this is called the power of meat. For this, you need to eat. Guess what? Meat is correct. The Khan Hansu decided that it was worth studying the techniques of even such low creatures as gnolls. The protagonist has been dragging this gnoll through the forest for several days and watching him eat all kinds of animals, and at every opportunity, he tries to attack the protagonist and always gets kicked in the head. This is due to the fact that the gnoll is level 6, and the protagonist is level 1, and the gnoll instinctively attacks weak target. Every time the gnoll ate meat, Energy accumulated in his stomach, and finally he reached his maximum and attacked the protagonist. This allowed the Kanhansu to learn this technique and use it against the Null. He was already torn in half by the force. It's a super energy-consuming force, but thanks to God's blessing, he recovers instantly and he can use it indefinitely. After receiving such power, the main character decided to return to the city to punish those bastards. He quietly approached the city and slipped over its walls. He killed the first guard and hid the body behind the toilets, then took out several more. Kang Hansu felt no difference between killing gnolls and killing humans, especially those who sought to kill him. Then he saw a strange scene. The locals were leading some tied-up people with bags over their heads. It was the same elves shown earlier. They had been captured and were all taken to that very basement. With cries of, "For the village elder," the villagers began slaughtering the defenseless elves. Only one was left, the one with turquoise hair, caught when she tried to flee the village. In just a moment, they were about to chop off her head, but suddenly, the protagonist appeared and decapitated the swordsman. "So it's you again," the protagonist said in surprise, as he had already saved her once before. From the beginning, the protagonist had planned to kill everyone in the village, humans and elves alike. The new village leader tried to escape but was taken down with a dagger to the back of the head. Only the elf girl remained. It turned out she had an extremely high level and a large number of buffs. The protagonist cut her ropes. "You'll handle the rest yourself," he said. She seemed weakened and immediately fell, whispering his name. How did she know him? The outsider god didn't like the protagonist being around the girl. It wasn't very outsider-like. The protagonist reassured the god, saying he'd get rid of her, but the village was dangerous and the forest was crawling with gnolls. They needed to get out of there first. They ran through the forest and the girl pointed upward. There, a massive phoenix was soaring through the sky. It descended, and the protagonist remembered that when checking her status window, he had noticed a buff called Animal Husbandry. So that's how she tamed it. She said something in an unfamiliar language, and he realized she wanted to say goodbye. She then leaned in and kissed him. The outsider god was utterly stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Afterward, she flew off on the phoenix, disappearing into the distance. He receives a notification that he has gained new patronage from an elf. "You are now named a friend of elves. Your lifespan and youth have been extended, and all effects and reputation gained from elves are significantly enhanced. This means that thanks to these two buffs, he's now even more than immortal." The outsider god grumbles about how the protagonist looks way too happy. However, the protagonist reassures him, saying he's glad he parted ways with that elf girl and can now move forward. We shift focus to the rest of the heroes, who are going on their first hunt to level up. The swordsman and the mage conduct a briefing. The knight's order will handle corralling the monsters, while the heroes are tasked with slaying them to gain experience and rank. The students are excited that there will finally be something besides theory. Now they'll have the chance to grow stronger. One of the heroes spots a slime and decides to make it his first victim. At this, the instructors shout, "Stop!" Slimes must not be killed because they reduce the spread of infectious diseases in the area. If you kill them, you'll be considered savages. Their conversation didn't last long as they heard the cries of gnolls, time for their first real battle. The first student swung his sword at a gnoll, but the gnoll managed to block the attack and counter. The student went down in a single strike, just like his other weak friends. "Enough," said the swordsman mentor as he came to the rescue of this group of incompetents, killing all the gnolls in mere moments. "It seems the gods must have had a reason for choosing these people," said the Saintess as she healed the so-called heroes. Though it was hard to call such failures heroes. The scene then shifted to another group of heroes led by one of the more capable students, named Choi Kang-min, a ridiculously difficult name to pronounce. He killed a gnoll with a single blow, immediately gaining level 2 and acquiring 2 new skills, acceleration and command. Next, we saw a group of idiots who were entranced by a girl with the skill seduction. Even so, they managed to gang up on a knoll and take it down, earning level 2 for themselves. Finally, we were shown the gods observing all the heroes from above. We transitioned to Eubora, the girl who became the mage's first apprentice. She's engaged in a one-on-one fight with a knoll. She cast a massive fireball, obliterating the knoll in a single spell, immediately reaching level 2. Next, we moved to Kang Hansu, who is slaughtering hordes of gnolls in the forest, desperately hoping to level up. He's already killed thousands of gnolls, but he's still stuck at level 1. On top of that, he's been afflicted with a curse called Carnage. The curse description states that experience gain is significantly reduced, but this significantly feels absurdly extreme. He begins to wonder if he'll ever be able to level up at all. Though he's gained no experience, at least he's accumulated a substantial hoard of gnoll treasures. His bag is overflowing with gold, but there's a problem. A language barrier. If he can't negotiate prices, the gold is as good as a pile of rocks, which means he needs a translator. Just then, a horned weirdo conveniently wanders through the forest, muttering, "Where's the one who wiped out all the gnolls?" Caught. It turns out the stranger is a demon, and as a result, Kang Hansu can understand his language. He recalls that the goddess-mentioned heroes were summoned to this world to defeat the Demon King. They were supposed to be incredibly strong. But this demon turned out to be weak, even by weakling standards. The demon reveals that he has the observation buff and finds it very strange that the protagonist is so powerful at level 1, especially considering he has more curses than buffs. The demon goes on to say that he is a dark mage who left his homeland to gain experience and get married. The outsider god becomes curious and demands more details about the marriage part. The demon explains how their world works. The stronger a demon is, the more spouses they can have. He left to gain experience because he didn't want to end up being the 243rd husband of some old crone. Also, the demon wonders why the protagonist is still able to move, given that he had released a paralyzing toxin. Even the sturdiest elves can't move after being exposed to it. This infuriates the protagonist, who recalls the village elder who had also poisoned him. Realizing there might be a connection, the protagonist angrily asks the demon about the old man. The demon said he vaguely remembers something. Long ago, he encountered a dying old man and saved him using an elven curse. "So, the mage who helped the elder and caused me so much trouble was you," the protagonist growled. We shift to the other heroes, where the Saintess addresses them. "To my great regret, some of the other heroes have chosen to abandon their training and return to the temple. From now on, we'll allocate the entire budget to those who remained." In other words, those who fought the gnolls in the forest. A scout rushes in to report that a level 5 gnoll has been spotted nearby. The mentors decide to send the most talented heroes to face this gnoll. One of the students immediately takes charge, leveraging his command skill, which boosts the stats of all nearby heroes. But this isn't just an ordinary gnoll. It's a gnoll that's overindulged in meat, meaning it's under the effect of meat lust, which significantly enhances its power. It quickly takes down the heroes, leaving only Eubora, who tries to cast a spell but is immediately kneed in the stomach. All the heroes are defeated within seconds, but the swordsman mentor arrives just in time and decapitates the gnoll. Yeah, the heroes clearly weren't ready to face such a serious opponent. We return to the protagonist, who has just beaten the demon to a pulp. He asks again, "So, will you help me? Or do I need to beat you up again?" The demon replies that he'll do his best to help, but can't enter the nearest city since a Saintess resides there. Instead, he suggests going to the second city. However, they'll have to take a detour because the knightly order has surrounded the forest. Thus, the two of them set off together. We then cut to the arrogant fool who considers himself the protagonist. He's traveling with a red-haired girl in his party. She's even paid for their lodging, armor, and weapons. He, of course, assumes this is because of his uniqueness blessing. The girl warns him that they're entering orc territory and need to be extremely cautious. Meanwhile, the gods are laughing at him, clearly having other plans for him. He takes a quest from the Mercenaries Guild to collect 5 gnoll ears, but they haven't encountered a single gnoll in the forest, though we know why. The arrogant guy acts recklessly, believing himself to be the protagonist, which annoys the red-haired girl to no end.
Suddenly, a gnoll attacks them from the forest. The arrogant guy, of course, falls down immediately, and the red-haired girl begins to fight the gnoll. The gnoll is very strong and in steel armor, so it's going to be tough to penetrate with a regular sword. But it's not just one gnoll. Soon, 2 more arrive to back him up. The girl realizes the situation is getting dire and tells the arrogant guy that she'll draw the gnoll's attention to herself so he can escape. He tries to resist, saying he can't turn down such a huge amount of experience, but then a stone hits him in the face, knocking him out. The gods roar with laughter. When he regains consciousness, the gnolls are gone, but the girl has lost her arm in the battle. The arrogant guy starts panicking, wondering how this could have happened. He's the protagonist. How could he allow this? The gods continue to mock him, to which he shouts, "Is it really so funny? A girl lost her arm." To which the gods respond with a curse, clairvoyance.
Even if there is no physical barrier, you will not be able to eavesdrop, and the chances of revealing your secrets and weaknesses are significantly increased. The meaning of the curse is hard to grasp, but the arrogant guy will no longer be able to eavesdrop on the girls. The arrogant guy decides to fix the situation and heads to the temple to ask the Saintess for help with the red-haired girl. Meanwhile, the protagonist and the demon are heading towards the city, and the protagonist decides to ask the demon for his name. Kogmos, 23rd son of the 348th wife of the 14th Demon King. "So, you're a failure of a demon who doesn't amount to anything," the protagonist comments. They find a trail and realize they are about to enter the territories of the Knightly Kingdom and the Orc lands. Almost immediately, they encounter a small orc patrol. They're busy tending to livestock. Orcs have a keen sense of smell, so they quickly detected the human. It's all because the protagonist's eyes glow in the dark, just like the gnolls. "Why didn't you turn them off?" asked the demon. "Because they looked cool," replied the protagonist. In the end, the entire orc patrol, about 10 of them, started heading toward the heroes. The protagonist, now so confident in himself, just jumped toward them. "Does this pig understand our language?" one of the orcs asked. Without hesitation, the protagonist stabbed the first orc with a dagger. The orcs were stunned by his boldness. The second orc got a dagger to the forehead, and one of the orcs exclaimed, "What kind of pig is this?" All the orcs were defeated, and it turned out to be way too easy. The demon starts to burn. "What happened, demon?" "Look at the sky. The Saintess is flying toward us. Kogmos can't heal the wounds inflicted by the Saintess that quickly, so now the protagonist must carry him." The god suggested leaving the demon to the orcs as food. The protagonist tells the demon that not long ago he almost became a hero. What? In the demon world, the hero curse is only given to demons who have escaped from heroes. A demon cursed with hero is essentially dead. Then the demon asks, "If Asa's buff removes all conditions, including the need to eat and drink, how did he get so strong?" After this question, the outsider god is flooded with flashbacks. Meanwhile, the other heroes are tilting because they were beaten by a single level 5 gnoll. A knightly scout reports that they couldn't find any gnoll traces in the forest. They suspect it was an unknown knightly order because no one else could have cleared out that many gnolls in a single day. But what kind of order could it be, and why are they operating on foreign territory? At this moment, the arrogant guy bursts into the temple with the girl whose arm was cut off. "Where's the Saintess?" The Saintess arrives and learns that the hero Ohanu has returned and is asking for help, but the guards block his path to her. Unthinkable, a level 1 hero, and with a curse too, thought the Saintess. But the girl without an arm caught her interest due to her high level and noble background. Most likely, she was the daughter of a duke, Do you see these priests and knights? Any one of them would sacrifice their life for others, so what's so special about this girl? The Saintess refuses to heal her until she proves her worth. Healing from the Saintess is expensive. One of the priests announces, "For the rescue of Elder Cerebret, the Elves have gifted the Saintess with 15 spiritual swords, 200 bows made from ancient wood, 600 unicorns, and 15 phoenix feathers." Do you understand? This is proof of value. Bora intervenes and suggests taking the girl as her companion. Let it be so. Lady Arya, may I have your hand? From this day, you are the sword and shield of hero Bora. After this, the Saintess restored the girl's arm. In gratitude, the arrogant guy became the second disciple of the sorceress, which lifted his spirits, and he once again thought it was because of his uniqueness skill. Meanwhile, Protagonist, who continues cutting through orcs in the forest. Suddenly, he hears a strange sound. It turns out to be a carriage moving at great speed, with orc riders on bulls chasing after it. The carriage is cornered, and only a few swordsmen remain as guards. Two girls step out. One looks like a mage, and the other like a swordswoman. The mage begins casting spells, while the swordswoman rushes at the orcs. Explosions begin. The protagonist and the demon watch from the side. "Looks powerful," said the protagonist. "Seems like these girls are from the high society of this world." At that moment, the protagonist shouts at the top of his lungs, "The females here are incredibly beautiful." And from afar, huge crowds of orc riders begin to converge. Now that everyone has gathered, the protagonist decides to intervene. He shoves 2 fingers into an orc's nose and flips him over his shoulder. This shocks the girls. Next, he faces the orc leader and punches through him with his fist. The protagonist easily deals with all the remaining orcs. After that, the people he saved approached him, and Kogmos acted as the translator. "I am Mage Kogmos, and this is Swordsman Khan Hansu. He doesn't know the official language," the demon explained. The mage girl was surprised to learn that he had both the hero curse and the elf's favor rank S at the same time. Even someone married to an elf can only have rank E. The mage girl apologized for initially thinking he was a villain. This conversation completely baffled the outsider god, as everything was going completely against his outsider expectations. "Dear God, calm down, and I'll tell you my secret," the protagonist said. "A certain god remarks that being a eunuch is not a crime, hinting that his blessing removes all states, including the erection, you know." The protagonist is sitting by a campfire when the mage girl approaches him and tries to say something, but of course, he doesn't understand. He shows her his dark magic, but for some reason, she screams and runs away. The protagonist just can't understand the female mind. Meanwhile, arrogant kid who got evicted from the hero dormitory. He has 3 options: accept severance pay and surrender. In this case, he can no longer call himself a hero. If caught doing so, the punishment is death. Return to training, but he won't receive any support until he demonstrates results. Entrust himself to the temple, dedicating his life from marriage to old age. However, he won't be able to leave the temple for the rest of his life. He was given a contract to sign, a decent sum of gold, and new documents in exchange for his hero credentials. Meanwhile, the saint is discussing the situation with gnolls in the forest with her assistant. It is assumed that this was a well-trained group of warriors. Could it have been the Demon King's army? But it's too early to jump to conclusions. However, the demon lands are far to the east, making it unlikely they would send forces here to kill gnolls. Her thoughts are interrupted by a priest. "You have a message from the school. While the school is on break, its administration would like to invite the heroes." How did information about the heroes leak? It turns out the arrogant idiot flashed his status window in the mercenary guild. So much news at once. One of the knights rushes in and reports that they found a bag with the hero's personal belongings. We return to the protagonist, who has just arrived in the city. They wander around the market, eating fruit, even though the main character doesn't need to eat. First, they need to find out what the girls they saved want from them. The girls offer to repay them for saving their lives by renting them an inn. They also need to wash up since the main character smells like a dirty orc after the journey. At the inn, slimes clean their clothes. These trained slimes cost a fortune, about the size of the slimes themselves in gold. They change into nice clothes and go to meet the girls. The god of outcasts is clearly displeased by this. And then the girls appear, dressed in evening gowns instead of travel clothes. Together, they head off for dinner. Meanwhile, arrogant kid who is heading to the slave market to assemble a party. He walks around, browsing the slaves, but none of them catch his interest. Then he runs into a familiar hero, who seems to be doing the same thing. What's he doing here, and who's that mountain of a man with him? The familiar hero explains that he too gave up heroism, took the compensation, and decided to spend it on buying slaves. But there's something suspicious about this guy. The arrogant kid approaches a bored slave trader and casually shows his status. The trader perks up immediately, realizing that heroes tend to have deep pockets. The trader grants him access to the slave quarters, where all the options are on display. As expected of a typical nerd, the arrogant kid wants a strong woman for his party. But when he's shown one, he must have been expecting a shy and cute waifu. The trader explains that slaves cannot disobey their master because of the slave curse. If they do, they experience excruciating pain. Eventually, the arrogant kid finds 3 cute girls, classic nerd behavior, aiming to surround himself with a harem. Although these girls aren't entirely weak, each of them is level 6. The big, strong woman he saw earlier was level 17. The trader redraws the contract, officially making the arrogant kid their owner. The former hero is reminded that he must give clear commands because slaves sometimes kill their masters. The arrogant kid is absolutely thrilled, as are the gods, who take delight in mocking him yet again. Meanwhile, the protagonist is trying to join the Adventurers Guild, but runs into his first major problem. He doesn't know the language. The demon reassures him that this is common among mercenaries since many of them can't read or write either. The demon gives him an example of how to write his name, Kan Hansu. With great difficulty, he finally manages to sign the contract. He was immediately granted the title Rank D Mercenary because the rescued girls vouched for him. After joining the guild, the girls give him his first mission, Orc Extermination. His task is to reduce the number of orcs to curb their prolific breeding. The god of outcasts asks if the main character plans to stage a massacre. No, this time it will be complete annihilation, he replies. He sets off toward the orcs with the girls, using them as bait. The girls manage to take down an orc together, but not without difficulty. They watch as Kan Hansu effortlessly slaughters orcs and remark that they've never seen anyone so extraordinary before. It's so easy to mistake him for a demon because of his hero's curse, a condition typically associated with demons. However, thanks to the elves' blessing, they trust him. For hours on end, without rest, he cuts down orcs. The girls plead with him to at least take a break. How does he have such endurance? They wonder. He exterminates all the orcs in the area, yet he doesn't even break a sweat. The girls don't realize that he doesn't tire at all. They assume it's just a rare talent. He also starts learning the official language, using a children's picture book. He surprises them by saying in the official language, "Hey women, let's go." Meanwhile, at the temple, the saint examines the hero's belongings they found. They lay out all the items from the backpack on a table, marveling at the printing techniques of that era. "Who knows about this backpack?" she asks. "Just me and the commander," comes the reply. "You must forget this backpack exists," she orders. However, they cannot identify the owner of the backpack since they don't know the hero's language. The saint assigns her assistant the task of learning it to decipher the contents of the bag. The saint doesn't believe that the perfect god could make a mistake. The assistant reports that they found the bodies of elves sacrificed alongside the bodies of their executioners. The locals believe it was the revenge of a vengeful foreign soul. We return to the protagonist, who has set up camp for the night. He uses the time to study the picture book. The God of Outsiders enjoys it and asks him to read more. Honorable God will read it later. We've been unexpectedly surrounded, and it seems like it's by humans, Kan Hansu says. He wakes up Cogmos and informs him of the encirclement, then wakes the girls with the phrase, "Women, do you want to die?" From the tall grass, a group emerges, led by a man with a scar on his face. Their leader said to give back all the trophies they got from the orcs. And then from what the protagonist realized, he said to kill the men and leave the women. The girls, of course, are against it, and the protagonist says he will send them all to heaven. The protagonist again shouts, "There are strong females here." Then the troop starts shooting at the protagonist with crossbows, but they didn't hurt him. The battle begins. He hit their leader, and then on the cry of the protagonist came the orcs' protagonist, just from the outside watching as the orcs deal with the robbers. And it looks like a massacre, which will give double experience, after which he was attacked by several robbers. But they did not live long. Next, he was attacked by their leader and was able to attack him in the back. But he did not know that such attacks do not hurt the protagonist, and then he hand-punched him through. The action moves to the Adventurers Guild, where the protagonist brings a huge bag of orc nickels. He could have brought more if he didn't have the girls with him. After that, he gives the quest sheet to the girls. They are delighted because they raised 2 levels in one day. But Han Kansu still has the first level. Questions for the outsider god. The god doesn't know what he's talking about. We're transported to the memories of the god. At first, the world was filled with emptiness. Then came the stars and the first life. The first living creatures began to find altars and pray on them. Eventually, these altars became gods. Living beings wished for God's help. So the first gods appeared. Gradually, they became more and more. Each of them in his own way helped living beings as if competing with each other. Having received the favor of the gods, living beings began to develop in different directions. So began senseless wars. Time passed, and in one of the caves, one of the gods found a dying man. God asked him if he wanted to live, and the god helped the man. Then the man turned into a child. God went to the nearest village and asked his grandfather and grandmother to go to the cave. So the god saved the man at his own request. The god watched the boy grow up and one day dared to talk to him and asked him how he was doing. To which the ungrateful little shit said, "Because you made me a child, the woman I love was taken from me." God freaked out. He saved a man from death. Why would he say that? He doesn't understand why everyone he helped cursed him, so hundreds of years passed. The outsider god didn't help anyone else. After so long, the gods decided to change the rules and introduced a system of patronage and curses. The gods got used to the new system, except for one god. We see a wounded, dying hero, and the outsider god asks him if he wants to live. The hero replied that of course he does. But the god warns him that he has to lose everything. He heals the hero and thinks that someone still needs him in this world. The hero is glad to be alive, but then he sees his status window. Why the hell does he have a level 1? God warned him. Hero was immediately kicked out of the group because they don't want weaklings. The hero said he wouldn't complain to God, but let me give one warning. Don't give anyone else patronage. It's a curse that takes something more valuable than life. The god desperately denied, but finally had to admit that the world didn't need him. So many years passed, until the god again met a dying man. This time it was Kan Hansu. What happened next, you already know? We are back in the present. Finally, the protagonist realized why he was swinging so slowly. In fact, he doesn't swing at all. The patronage brings him back to 0 experience each time. Meanwhile, the arrogant kid is in trouble. He wakes up lying on the ground in the woods. It turns out that he and his girls were attacked by the former hero and the slave market bully. 5 minutes before, the ex-hero had told Ohanu to give him his slaves. Then he wouldn't get hurt. In response, Ohanu only showed a dumb face. We go back to the protagonist's place in the city. He tries to find information about some legendary sword in the library. Since he cannot pump, you can at least find a top weapon. Before this, aristocratic girls and the demon told him that there are no such weapons. Kang Hansu asks if there are any undiscovered ruins. The demon replied that the entrance to such ruins is guarded by knights. The protagonist went for a walk and cannot stop thinking about the knights. But then an orc appeared from somewhere and said, "Hey pig, give me everything you have." This orc has never been so wrong before. So the protagonist starts beating him up. During the beating, it turns out that there are huge orc ruins. A couple of beats later, the orc agrees to escort Kang Hansu to these ruins. The orc says that a strong man like him can't go into the ruins. This was before he was born, apparently meaning that there is a level limit. What the hell, there's nothing here. Moments later, the entrance to the ruins appeared out of nowhere. The orc was stunned. He thought he was going in without it, since the entrance is available to creatures level 9 and below. No problem, Kang Hansu is level 1. You've wandered into orc territory. The orcs think it's just another low-level human they're going to eat. God prays for the repose of a few 100,000 orcs, and the protagonist starts chopping up orcs in packs. He destroyed a huge pile of orcs and collected the bodies in a pile. After that, he released the slimes to deal with the bodies. Time to check the level. Of course, he didn't level up, but he was given a new curse called extermination. Increases the likelihood that the dead people you kill will haunt you in your dreams. Who cares if the protagonist is awake anyway? When the protagonist had slaughtered all the orcs, he freed the captured humans. Kang Hansu started looking for a way out of the city. One of the orcs, after questioning him, said that he must be somewhere in the center of the ruins. In the distance, a bright light appeared, and out of it came an orc, obviously of high level, and asked, "Are you the man who destroyed our abode?" "I asked them to leave, but they did not leave," replied Kang Hansu. "And for this reason you exterminated 300,000 orcs." 300,000. This orc is the guardian of this city and is responsible for making sure that not a single soul leaves the city. "Guardian, you say? So there must be treasure here," shouted the protagonist and rushed to attack. Kang Hansu with his dagger and the guardian orc with a huge trident. After they clashed weapons, Kang Hansu's dagger flew away with his hand. "And this orc is very strong. This is the end," shouted the guardian and tried to finish him off. "I'm surprised he survived my crowning death blow. You will be responsible for the death of 300,000 of my fellows." The protagonist's arm grows back and he is ready to fight again. "Is your body immortal?" asked the guardian. "I don't care if it's 100 years or 1,000, I'll lock you in here until you die of old age," shouted the orc. Meanwhile, we are transported to the hero Eubora. He and Arya, the red-haired girl whose arm was cut off, are discussing patronage. One of them is the aristocracy, which Arya has had since birth. Due to it, she gets a part of the experience gained by her vassals, so she can get experience points for nothing. But the problem is that she doesn't have any vassals and doesn't use this buff at all. A saint came over, despite the late hour. They sat down to tea, and the saint made light conversation. But from her appearance, it looked like she came with a specific purpose. The saint is worried that the hero competition will have unintended consequences. Because from time to time, hero downfalls happen when heroes become obsessed with patronage and temptation. Then Eubor remembered the moment when the goddess sent Kang Hansu home. And luckily, the saint asked Eubor if she knew Kang Hansu. "Is he your boyfriend?" the saint asked. But Eubora replied that they were just acquaintances. Later in her bedroom, the saint thought that Eubora was lying, and it was obvious that Kang Hansu was very interested in her. If the truth comes out that Kang Hansu couldn't actually return home, it could greatly undermine the hero's trust in the gods. The problem would be over if he's dead, just enough to hide the evidence. But what if he's still alive? The goddess revealed herself and let it be known that she was extremely displeased. The goddess can easily find any hero because of their patronage, but even she couldn't find Kang Hansu. Could it be that another god is preventing them? They need to find him and erase even his trace. And an outsider god was watching. He has learned of the saint's plan. Meanwhile, somewhere far away in the orc ruins, the protagonist continues to fight an orc. It is already night outside. "How long are you going to waste your strength?" asked the orc. "Until you die, you damned orc," replied Kang Hansu, and they continued the battle. The orc is too strong and fast. Kang Hansu retreated, and he's sitting on the ground trying to work out a plan to fight the orc. A man comes up behind him and says hello. The man turns out to be Bruce, the new leader of the group of human survivors that the protagonist saved. He brought a woman with him, but the protagonist chased him away, apparently misunderstanding him. But the woman stayed and continued to watch him develop a battle plan. It was morning. Kang Hansu decided to show the outsider god the move he had learned overnight. It turned out that he had repeated the Guardian's technique exactly. In return, the outsider god increased his level of ACCA patronage. And at the same moment, the hero curse level increased, which means that the goddess has noticed him and knows he's alive. It's time to punish the pig. The guard took him to the training hall and told him that heroes used to train here. But many years ago, humanity sank in pride, and this place was taken over by orcs. As long as Kang Hansu lives, these ruins cannot be rebuilt. So Kang Hansu must die here. But before the battle, he asked if there was treasure in this place. Here rests the weapons prepared for the heroes who barely left the training hall. How are you going to defeat the goddess with a beginner's weapon? This is a failure, thought Kang Hansu. But his thoughts were interrupted by the Guardian. Kang Hansu is doing much better this time. He dodges all of the orc's attacks. It's only a day he's gotten so strong, thought the orc. You're so worried about this place, can't you go beyond it? And the protagonist throws the orc outside the ruins. A portal opened up in this place. After that, Kang Hansu found a room with treasures. Among them was a sword, the one for beginners. But this is a sacred sword. The god tells him that this sword can only be used by a hero, then it starts to sparkle strangely. "You don't need a goddamn hero, do you?" shouted the hero and broke the fucking sword. "If I can't use it, then neither can the other heroes." The protagonist broke all the swords but one. This one was apparently defective and Kang Hansu was able to take it. And then he got the sacred sword curse for what? Meanwhile, let's see what's going on with the rest of the characters. A girl who has the skill of seduction is not happy that even she has to fight, not just use the people around her. She dreamed of being protected by handsome knights, not these nerds. They start discussing going to academy, but one of the nerds says he doesn't really want to set up her love affair with a prince on a white horse. She said it's not gonna happen, or she'll do whatever he wants. After that, the nerds went ballistic, and eventually all three of them agreed to go to the academy with the girl. We're back to the protagonist. He received the curse of the sacred sword. The blacksmith's bloody tears strengthen all holy swords in your vicinity. But there's only one holy sword left, so never mind the curse. "Human!" shouts a guardian orc from somewhere far away. Wow, he made it out and is running to attack the hero. The hero assumes that when he leaves the ruins, he starts to age and that he's not going to let him in. Well, it's time to try out the new holy sword. Now the protagonist chops off the orc's arm, but the orc has regeneration. He grows a new arm. He swung his sword and attacked the orc. The orc wondered how again in just 24 hours he had progressed so much. He chopped off the orc's head, but this orc is not so easy to kill. He begins to regenerate. The protagonist grabs his head and asks, "If you toss his head outside the ruins, will he die?" The orc then starts begging for mercy and says he'll do anything to stop the hero from killing him. He said he could move the hero from the ruins and was surprised that Kang Hansu could hold the sacred sword. And then he realized Kang Hansu was a hero. The orc said he had a curse of the ruins that kept him from leaving the neighborhood. Kang Hansu ordered him to open the exit and also release all the captured humans. The men start arguing with each other in an incomprehensible language. three of them decide to stay in the ruins for some reason. The hero goes to the portal, but before he does, he asks the orc how he can get back here. He needs to touch the sword and then he can be heard. He went into the portal and found himself in some room. He ordered people to go back to the portal because this place didn't look safe. And under the table, he saw his backpack. So this is the saint's room. The same one who was going to kill him so he wouldn't hurt the gods. At this time, the heroes go to the academy, and right now they are in the town where the same headman Dark Mage was killed. Saint and the knights investigate the basement where the sacrifices were made. She explains to the local chief that she's just here to find out the details of that murder story. You realize how important Guardian Silverate is. Your ignorance is causing problems. If it's about the Phoenix elf who was saved by Kang Hansu. She asked him what the one who slaughtered everyone here looked like. Short, black hair. He looked like the heroes who came to the city. The saint is slowly starting to believe that Kang Hansu is alive. But how? He was able to slaughter everyone when the rest of the heroes were hurt by just one knoll. And none of the gods could help him because they were all in the temple too. But somehow the goddess wants the saint to fix the problem. The heroes are vacationing in the city and they see a strange figure in the woods. They thought it might be a knoll attack, but it turns out to be a dorky asshole. Aka Ohanu, former hero. He looks a little shabby. Ohanu started arguing with the leader of the heroes. Ohanu was in a real battle in the forest, unlike them suckers. The hero leader decided to show him the difference in their level. The fight starts. A red-haired girl runs out between them and says that Ohanu is injured and the fight is unfair. At this time, the saint returns and intervenes in their argument. Let me heal him so the fight will be fair. The battle begins again. Ohanu has been patronized by the god Revenge. He wants to show his power to those who mocked him. Ohanu casts a huge wave of flame. The leader of the heroes thinks he can just dodge such a bulky attack. But the first wave of flames is immediately followed by a second wave. Not so simple. The leader dodged it too. Very quickly, he shortened the distance and now he was right next to it. You lost to Ohan. But suddenly the uniqueness skill triggers and some kind of shield appears between them, and then an explosion. Both heroes were scattered in different directions and lost consciousness. The saint says, "Why don't you get up and clean this place up?" At this time, the protagonist returns to the city after a long journey. "Oh, Cogmos, you haven't run away yet?" asked Kang Hansu. Originally planned to as early as yesterday, but a person came to the city that they should not meet in any way. It's the Swordmaster, Prince Alos. The girls said that the prince is looking for a meeting with the protagonist. But the demon won't go there, or he's finished. Speak of the devil, the girls he rescued showed up. "Because of your strength, you're popular with the females," said the demon. The girls ask him where he's been, so he gets a new curse. The protagonist replies that he's been hunting. Then the demon says that after this town he will leave Kang Hansu, otherwise he will definitely die somehow. "Oh, you!" and strangles him like Homer Simpson strangles his son. Their conversation is interrupted by the Pull Girls and calls them to go for a walk. They're walking around town, and the main character is constantly being accosted by some older women. A little later in the evening, they go to a reception at the Sword Prince's manor. Kang Hansu was dressed in clothes worthy of an aristocrat. Inside, the manor looked very rich. He is greeted by the prince himself. The protagonist found him quite imposing. Kang Hansu understands him, as he has a language patronage. Princes need to be able to communicate in different countries and with different peoples. First of all, the prince expresses his gratitude to him for clearing his lands of the orcs that were causing the kingdom a continuous headache. That being said, I'm extremely curious about the abilities of slaying a huge horde of steppe orcs. Would you be willing to fight? The protagonist a little taken aback by this proposal. But first he needs to eat. The hero gobbles up the treats like a pig. The Sword Prince asks him how he got the curse of the hero. Kang Hansu replies that he was punishing the hero who was teasing an innocent elf girl. "Then can you remind me what that hero looked like?" asked the prince. "No, I don't remember. I just punched him in the face," replied Kang Hansu awkwardly. "That's okay. We'll find a hero with a wound. They're all in this town." He was invited here because their investigation led them to the man who killed the most orcs. The prince says that not long ago, numerous steppe orcs vanished as if they never existed. "I probably caught too many," replied Kang Hansu awkwardly. According to Lady Kang Hansu, he's an interesting person. That's why the prince is so interested in him. Later, they went out to the courtyard to spar. He showed a dagger. It's an elf dagger. The prince is a bit shocked. But fighting with real weapons in sparring is too much, so the protagonist will fight with his finger. Kang Hansu finally got the prince's old sword. There's no need to fight with bare hands. The prince concedes the right of first strike to the protagonist. "Alos is the third strongest knight in the kingdom. Why don't I test my strength?" Kang Hansu was surrounded by a red aura, after which he attacks the prince. A huge pillar of light appeared above the manor and dust covered everything. The protagonist worries that he hit too hard. What if he killed the prince? There's an exit in the back. Maybe we should run away right now. And indeed, Kang Hansu runs away because he realizes the level of trouble over killing the prince. But luckily, the prince turns out to be alive, even though he broke his sword. He's even more interested in Kang Hansu now. Girl's eyes widened. "Your Majesty, are you all right?" Apparently, he was surprised too and ran away immediately. The prince wanted to apologize to Kang Hansu, and the girls ran to the inn to deliver the message. The action moves to the saint's room. "Someone entered my room without permission. Someone has definitely been here. Look at the footprints." The saint noticed that the backpack was stolen, why it was stolen, and not the holy items that are all over the walls. They stole proof of divine deception. The goddess has appeared, and she is extremely displeased that the saint didn't destroy the bag sooner. Now they have even more added problems. She uses the orb to ask for news to be sent to the Elf Kingdom and Prince Alos. The maid reports to the prince that the saint is looking for him. "You've been looking for me?" the prince asks the saint. She asks him how the investigation into the orc murder is going. The prince reports that he has captured an orc and questioned who carried out the massacre in the orc domain. Apparently, it was some kind of demon. The saint has given him orders to watch out for demons that may be nearby. Back to the protagonist, who hastily packs his things and tells the demon that they must flee as he may be captured and executed for killing the prince. "What have you gotten me into?" screams the demon. The protagonist picked up the sacred sword and ordered it to open the portal, just as his guardian orc had taught him. The demon is shocked that Kang Hansu knows how to open portals. "Come to the north gate. There's no time to explain," said Kang Hansu and entered the portal. On the other side, waiting for him was a guardian orc and the surviving humans. The protagonist says he needs people to help him move things. Then they start dragging things to the other exit. Kogmos waited for Kang Hansu at the north gate. Then he said that they should go to the north. There is the biggest slave market there, where they can buy a translator and the demon can finally get away from him. The protagonist picked up the demon and ran. It would be faster. The demon was hungry. The protagonist opened a portal and 2 plates of food appeared from there. After they ate, the protagonist threw the plates back into the portal. "I've never heard of magic that cooks food in my dishes," said the demon. They finally arrived in the city. It's a fairly large city. Kogmos asked Kang Hansu to return his belongings if they were going to break up after this town. The protagonist returned his bag with no problem. Demon was also curious about his sword and asked for permission to examine it. After that, the demon was struck by a discharge. It's a sacred sword, so obviously demons can't touch it. The slave market is in full swing, with solicitors everywhere advertising their wares. They went into a top guild and said they needed a slave with language patronage and preferably strong enough to accompany the Khan Hansu. This slave here, the seller shows the slave, and she turns out to be a very beautiful demoness. Kogmos seems to be in love. Kang Hansu laughs that he was expecting this, since his order for a slave completely matched Kogmos's description, and it is logical that a demon could meet all the requirements. Kogmos says he's buying this slave girl. But you don't have any money. Kang Hansu asked the demoness how she became a slave. She said there was a man who doubted her love for her, after which she agreed to be branded a slave. And then he dumped her. Classic story. But Kogmos was touched by her. But Demonica apparently didn't like Kogmos very much, she said.
Get this insect away from me who's trying to feel sorry for me. I want to gouge his eyes out. The protagonist looked at her stats. Level 27. Impressive. The demoness explains to him that because of the patronage of a slave, she gets true happiness when she does her master's bidding. And that's the only reason she's willing to serve a pathetic human. The protagonist couldn't resist buying more cheap slaves, then sent them through the portal. Kogmos says he's changed his mind about leaving him and going with them. He must have liked that demoness too much. And that's when Kogmos gets an arrow in the back of his head. The demoness says she would have liked to do it herself, but she was beaten to it. Seconds later, more arrows fly at them, but the protagonist fights them off. What a wonderful world where arrows fly in broad daylight. They quickly found the scum in the alley and gave them what they deserved. They're stealing slaves. Apparently there's a rumor going around town that a level 1 man bought a lot of slaves, said the demoness. The guards are coming, let's get out of this town. They stopped in the forest. By this time Kogmos had already healed his wounds with regeneration. Out of the blue, the demoness tried to attack Kang Hansu from behind. He'd been warned that slaves sometimes kill their masters. The protagonist caught her arm and said, I guess I'm easy prey in your eyes too. The demoness doesn't calm down and continues to attack. This time Kang Hansu decided to meet her blow with his own punch. After that, she lost her arm. Are you definitely level 1? You pathetic human, shouted the demoness before attacking again. Fine, then I'll show you the master's abilities. And the protagonist is showered with a hail of red fists. But she was able to dodge the last killing blow. What's the matter with you? Then she counterattacked Kang Hansu and a fountain of blood spurted out. These wounds are nothing to a demon. Now order me to get free, then I'll heal you right away, said the demoness. Don't bother, now I order you to stay where you are, said the protagonist. Great, we can both regenerate, let's fight until one of us dies, said Kang Hansu. Are you ordering me? The demoness clarifies. Then the fight continues and the demoness says that she has never sworn allegiance to anyone. After a while, the demoness realizes that her wounds are not healing in time. She didn't have time to dodge and was kicked in the stomach with her leg. The demoness still has some tricks up her sleeve, she's got wings. She pushes off of his arm and soars upward, though it seemed like she had no strength left due to her constant regeneration. I promise to finish you in one blow, says the demoness and prepares a mega leg kick. And it hit him right on the head with all its force and the hero blacked out. He wakes up after a while. What happened? I lost, he thought. You're awake, master. He heard a demoness voice from behind Kang Hansu's back. You're going to provide me with new clothes. This one was torn during the battle. Taking care of a slave's needs is the master's duty. The protagonist took out a blue dress from the portal and handed it to the demoness. The demoness said that they didn't manage to reveal a winner, but it seemed to her at the end that he gave in to her. By the way, Diaroka, that's the demoness's name, do you want to say I lost and I will submit to you? The demoness replied that recognizing a low-grade creature is already a hard decision to make. Then she said she was exhausted and hung on to him. At this time the saint thinks about strange coincidences. First all the gnolls disappeared, now the orcs. With these questions she went to Elder Cerebret, the very same elven woman. When the saint spoke of gnolls, Silver remembered the moment in the forest when they had last seen Kang Hansu. The saint asks for help in finding her lost item, and in this, the elder will be helped by a special slime. Come, I'll show you its power, said the elfess. They are at the scene of the crime and Silver asks the slime to tell the identity of the robber. A slime named Meowl said that the robber got into the room through the sacred sword on the wall. This can't get any worse, the criminal is a hero, thought the Holy One. An elven girl asks the saint to help her get a job at the academy as a teacher, because her dislike of violence has prevented her from leveling up and the best thing she can do is teach. That way she can gain experience points without fighting, with the patronage of teacher. Excellent choice, I'll help in any way I can, replied the saint. We're taken to the jerk who woke up after the battle with Choi Kangmin, the leader of the heroes. He sees a crowd of onlookers gathered nearby. People were seeing the heroes off, and among them was the elf Silveret. What a hottie, Ohanu. The HQ man approached and asked, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" hoping for a uniqueness skill. But he was rebuffed. It didn't work again, although why again, it never did. He tried again and asked if she was married, but this time he was turned down by the elf woman's knight. Ohanu is gone, but that doesn't mean he's given up. He thinks he's the main character and should definitely help the elder. He overheard that the heroes will go to the academy, and that hottie will be a teacher there. The arrogant guy immediately started daydreaming about a romantic day at the academy. But he has to start by getting into the academy. But to do that, he has to be reinstated as a hero. He went to the other heroes and said he'd enter a tournament to get into the academy. The prince told him that only heroes can enter, but he's been progressing quite well lately. But either way, he'll need his money back to regain his status. And then there's the sparring. But it only lasted one punch, after which Ohanu hit the wall with his forehead. Aloes asks the heroes which one of them is going to compete in the tournament. The heroes start raising their hands, but not all of them. There are doubters. The saint intervenes, "Enough, prince. You shouldn't force the heroes to participate, you should respect their choice. Those who don't participate can go back to the dormitory and pack up. Because they are going to support the brave and strong-willed heroes." And then all the other heroes raised their hands. We now return to the protagonist. He's been abandoned by the demon Cogmos. He said he had to get stronger to be a worthy match for Ms. Diarocha. The outsider god offered to abandon the demon, but Kong Hansu reassured the god he'd only swap one translator for his female version. The outsider god is not happy with what is happening to the protagonist. He is too successful and taking offense makes an escape. In fact, he just went to spy on the prince, the saint and the others. The heroes were just practicing for the tournament and saw a sign on the schedule board. The winner of the tournament will receive a sacred sword and a chance to enter the academy. The god was incredibly enthusiastic about the idea. At this time, the protagonist made it to the inn where he was able to put Diarocha on the bed. He's a little worried about the god, but it seems like his patronage is still working, so he hasn't given up on it. The protagonist looks out the window. It's evening. Just at this time the slave thieves are getting active. We should take revenge on them before they leave the city. The god returned and said that he was on a solitary journey. The protagonist asked if he wanted to go for a walk with him while the demoness was asleep. Gotta get revenge on those bastards. God asks where he's going next. Maybe he should go to the academy. The protagonist doesn't really like that idea, but the god asks if he'll go to the academy if he helps him with the thieves. But first, you need bait. He bought himself the cheapest slaves and went out on the street. It didn't take long for the thieves to arrive. Some two assholes shot him with crossbows. But Kong Hansu can't be taken. Soon the rest of the gang appeared on the roof with the leader. He jumped down to the ground with him. It's time for the slaying. He knocks out one by one, and strangely enough, even God is helping him. He probably wants the protagonist to go to the academy. Only the leader was left and Kong Hansu broke his spine with 2 legs, Mortal Kombat style. In the morning, the guards found the bound and mangled bandits and the protagonist even received a reward for catching particularly dangerous criminals. Wait, Kong Hansu. shouted the chief of guards to him. He told him something about his son and the academy. That's all the protagonist realized. Apparently he wants help. Khan Hansu says he'll help, but he has a condition. He wants to go to the academy too. But the knight turned him down. We'll have to renegotiate. It's about time the demoness interpreter showed up. The knight reacts negatively to the demon's appearance, but she's a human slave. God insists that Kong Hansu continue negotiating and then disappears. Suddenly there's a loud noise. The guards say, "Look what's there." A huge dragon appears over the city. The dragon says it will wipe out the heroes and the rest of the people. Then the dragon saw the hero's first level as it happened. He must have meant who was able to free him. As you can imagine, it was a god. Apparently that's his bargaining chip for the academy. Demoness says it's a catastrophe-level dragon. The guard commander rushes into battle, and the god tells the protagonist it's a great chance to show the knight his skills. Work for the sacred sword. Diaraka says, "Master, are you a hero?" The guards start firing bows at the dragon. A knight attacks next. The knight is not bad, not just a tin can. It's time for the hero to step in. We need to kill him quickly before he levels up. Because when the god resurrected him, the dragon was reborn level 1. The protagonist asks Diaraka to distract the dragon while he prepares a strike. She attacks him. Despite the huge level difference, the dragon is very strong. But so far the demoness is holding on with her regeneration. The protagonist used all the buffs he had and attacked the dragon. That should be enough. Diaraka and the god were shocked by the power of Kong Hansu's blow. He chopped off the dragon's head in one go. The knight asked, "Were you really able to defeat the dragon with level 1? The demoness offered to scratch his eyes out for doubting him. The dragon isn't dead yet, he says. What an injustice. A great dragon king died by such a lowlife who isn't even a hero. In the name of my soul, I curse you, said the dragon. So the protagonist became the owner of another curse, Wrath of the King. The Wrath of the Dragon King provokes nearby dragons. When your life is in critical danger, an angry dragon will attack you. This curse will activate every time he has low health, which, as you can imagine, happens all the time. The demoness, on the other hand, has been patronized. It's exactly the opposite. It'll make the dragons help her when her life is in danger. All the townspeople shout, "Hail to the knight," and thank him for saving the town. Diaraka is not the best translator. The protagonist asked to give the trophies to those who suffered from the dragon and the support of the families of the dead. And the demoness said that they should be grateful that she and the master kept him alive, and he does not need this garbage, let them give it to the humans. You don't need enemies with a translator like that. Suddenly, the dragon wrath curse is activated and a dragon skeleton appears in the sky. The dragon's wrath is so strong that it's given the skeleton's physical form. We'll have to deal with them too. Meanwhile, the heroes tournament begins. Choi Kangmin is considered the favorite. Someone is considered to be the favorite, magician Yu Bora. Arya hides behind Yu Boru because her mother is sitting in the special guest box. The saint says the tournament is now open. They need to get to the forest as quickly as possible and destroy the orcs. Choi Kangmin prepared the carriage beforehand because he had information. Yu Bora has the skill, race, which greatly increases her speed until she reaches her target. Meanwhile, her assistant came to the saint with a report. She said that a red dragon king had appeared in the northern kingdoms. The saint asked if she was sure. The assistant confirmed that this was the same dragon the saint had slain over 100 years ago. The saint slayed it then along with the hero. There's a possibility that some god got the wrong place for the tournament and summoned the dragon. But there are no heroes there, they are all at the tournament. I doubt the gods would do such a thing. The saint remembered Khan Hansu again and guessed that there was a god near him that blocked other gods from searching for him. Then the assistant reported that the saint didn't need to worry because the dragon had already been captured and destroyed. Then it's not a red dragon because it can't be defeated alone. The saint calmed down. It's safe to focus on the tournament. Ohanu is in trouble again. All the wagons refused to carry him because he looks more like a jerk than a hero. But then one of the aristocrat girls that Kong Hansu had once rescued showed up and offered him a ride. Of course Ohanu thought it was his uniqueness, skill again. Back to the protagonist who is fighting bone dragons. The problem is that they keep appearing and appearing. One of the dragons attacked the knight and he has the skill, Dragon's Wrath, activated, the same as Diaroka. Now when he is at death the dragons start to defend him. The dragons start fighting each other, some want to kill the knight, others want to protect him. During the battle Diaroka is also attacked by a dragon and activates Wrath of the King. Now more dragons fight each other. There is dragon chaos in the city. The protagonist decides to finish them all off at once. He has the strength to do so. The slimes have plenty to do here. The whole city is littered with the bodies of bone dragons. Demoness asks the protagonist, "You really don't understand what happened?" Because of the patronage of the outsider god, he was constantly regenerating health while on the edge. This was the main trigger for summoning more and more dragons. Thus he became the dragon generator of the city. Kon Hansu tells to Diaraka to take all the bones for herself. She feels as if she's being lumbered with unwanted trash, but the bones are actually worth more than her life. A knight appears and begs Kon Hansu to go to the academy with his son. The outsider god's plan finally worked. The demoness told him that because he had accomplished a great feat, the knight was inviting him to visit. Such invitations should not be refused. They came to the estate to the knight, and at the same time with his son will meet. He's the one who's going to the academy. He's asked to go to the academy with his eldest son because his youngest son already has a partner. So Kong Hans will have to take care of the jerk. The demoness also translated that the protagonist is going to be tamed with money. That's the demoness free translation. Diaroka says to the knight, "My master wishes to look at your brat who locked himself in the guest room." It brought his parents to tears. A little later in Kon Hansu's bedroom, he asked the demoness what she knew about the academy. She told him that the humans had organized 4 academies to fight them demons. They trained their barbaric arts there, but they were still weaklings. The new academy was a place that proclaimed friendship and unity. This conversation was interrupted by that hapless son of a knight, shouting, "Hey, level 1 commoner, attack me." Well, if he asked, you can't refuse. After the protagonist writes him a couple of punches for prevention, he was stopped by a demoness and asked if he was not too fast taunting a level 13 weakling. He tried to run away, but the demoness calmed him down with her spell. They decided to take him to a healer. As soon as he woke up, he immediately rushed to attack the protagonist. The protagonist decided to impress his son and summoned a bone dragon, which ate him. And then Kon Hansu, having knocked out a tooth, spectacularly appeared from its mouth and said, "Let's become good friends." At this time, the saint is resting in her bedroom without strength and she received a call through the magic ball. It was the academy principal and she has a matter they need to discuss in person. The academy principal looks more like a prostitute than a principal. She tells Saint that a very large number of promising students have enrolled this year and she wants to open up the underground ruins so they can train with the heroes. The Saint is surprised that the academy was able to remove the god's seal from the labyrinth. This structure was built in the Age of Legends and a great number of useful relics have been found there. The Saint agrees, it will be a necessary element of development for the heroes. After the conversation, the Saint is clearly excited. Just how many heroes will manage to survive? Meanwhile, the protagonist Ohanu is camped out in the forest with the aristocratic girls. He's completely immersed in his dreams of a harem of hotties. But in reality, the girls think he's a creep. The hero Ohanu and the aristocrat girls walk through the forest in search of orcs. There are footprints here, so it looks like some group has been here before them. Judging from the slimes still cleaning up, they're not far away. Ohanu saw the battle, over there, in the distance. They saw Yu Bora and Arya fighting the orcs. A very strong couple. One orc attacks Arya from the back, but Yu Bora hit him with her whole body. She has the weapon, Patronage, which allows her to turn her body into a powerful weapon in any situation. It also regenerates like her body. "Oh, Ohanu, you got here sooner than we expected," said Yu Bora. Ohanu doesn't understand how Yu Bora got such a huge strength from. Yu Bora replied that it's like in school. The headman seat is given to the smartest student, but in the fantasy world it depends on your strength. Yu Bora says goodbye to him, saying she'll go somewhere else to look for orcs. And Ohanu wishes her to take second place, hinting that he will take first place. "It would be nice to come in second place at least," Yu Bora replied and left. Before the heroine could leave, Ohanu and the girls were attacked by orcs. Ohanu shouted to the girls, "Don't worry, I'll deal with them alone," and started casting fire spells. But the orc didn't feel his power and hit Ohanu with his club. He was saved by the patronage of vitality. The girls laughed at him, remembering how Khan Hansu had easily dealt with orcs alone with the first level. They really hoped to meet him again. It was time for the girls to show their strength. The swordswoman chopped the orc's club into small pieces, and the magician killed 2 orcs at once with one spell. "With our level, it was nothing," said the swordswoman. "What do we do with the hero who passed out?" asked the mage girl. They then argue over who will carry him on their backs. The gods are laughing at this situation. Apparently Ohanu has become their favorite hero. At this time, the leader of the heroes, Kangmin, happened to meet a seductive girl. "Don't you dare interfere with my hunt or you'll regret it," said Kangmin, and his squad set out to find the orcs. He, with the support of 2 fire mages, starts killing the orcs one by one. "There's no way I'm giving up the victory," thought Kangmin. Meanwhile, the seductress girl is in trouble. Her nerd squad is surrounded by a large number of orcs. The squad leader herself is surrounded by orcs who are looking at her strangely. The seduction skill works on the orcs, but not as much as she would like. The orcs grab her and one of the nerds says, "You're the reason we're here, so sacrifice yourself so we can escape." The girl tells them, "I'll bait them and you run," then uses the skill Temptation and runs away from her squad. But she is quickly caught. After a while she wakes up and in front of her is one of her nerfs. They defeated the orcs, but at the cost of their lives. We're transported to the saint's office. Her assistant suggests that she tell the hero Kanman about the backpack and ask him to help her. To which the saint replies that she can't trust the hero with such a secret. It's time to summarize the results, with the award ceremony ahead. The saint is coming out to the heroes. It's time to summarize the heroes' tournament rankings. We return to the protagonist, who is traveling to the academy with the son of a knight. Who doesn't like being bossed around by a level 1 commoner? The demoness tells Khan Hansu that she can't enter the academy because her level is too high. But the protagonist reassures her that in this world, slaves are considered things, so he can easily take her with him. And so they arrived at the academy, Hogwarts. Well, like Hogwarts, you get the idea. The knight's son starts to panic. He doesn't want to go back to that hell. He's already been kicked out once. Kong Hansu is surprised that the academy looks more like a military town than a school. There are guards and training grounds everywhere. The protagonist came to the academy as a servant of a knight's son, so he has to look like an aristocrat. Despite entering as a servant, he still has to take the entrance exam. The examiner snorted when he saw his first level and then asked, "Do you know about elves?" Sure, one of them once even hit the protagonist with an arrow that almost killed him. They didn't ask him anything else and stamped his enrollment. This is end of first part of recap. Please subscribe, it's very important for channel.